So, hey there, everybody. Hope you're doing okay and surviving lockdown in your various parts of the world. Guess some of you are back to coaching now and finding things a little busier. And I think this week is half term, so I guess the camps and things that maybe you did have planned probably aren't taking place. But hopefully, you have been able to find, different ways of offering some coaching and working out how to get back to some sense of your normality, I guess, in terms of getting out there. Appreciate those of you in Scotland. Won't be quite at the same point. And I know we're sat here still in lockdown, so nothing much has changed yet for us. But really looking forward to being able to get back and visit family, I guess, and get out and see people again, which will be really good. So hopefully at some point as well, we can meet up again and see each other face to face and get back to where we were in terms of coaching and the Pathways program and some of the mentoring. And I suppose, what this has shown over the last few weeks is that, change is inevitable and our world can change at the drop of a hat. And what we took for granted perhaps disappears in an instant. And it really makes us rethink and revise and reevaluate, I suppose, what we maybe believe and think, which is perhaps a nice segue into this short video from me on talent. And really what you're going to get over the next 20 minutes or so is me thinking out loud and reflecting out loud on talent and what it really means for me. And I wanted to put this together, I suppose, for a number of reasons. Firstly, conscious that it was difficult for us all to find a date to get together. But also, I think all of us in the group are at very different stages in terms of our understanding, but also our involvement in, what is probably known as the talent pathway. And so our context and our, everyday working environment is probably very different, which is a good thing in terms of discussion because it gets us all thinking and coming at things from a different perspective. But on the other hand, it can be quite challenging because perhaps we don't all view things the same and things mean different things at different times to different people. So the purpose of this video really, I suppose, is a few different purposes. One is, I guess, is to provide some examples of, what reflection has meant for me and exploring a new subject, and also putting a caveat in place that this is my view. This is me looking into things and, drawing some conclusions on what I feel about talent and what it means for me in my context. And that's really not to say that that is the only way. It is just based on my reading, my understanding and my exploration. And I think that's a really good thing. So going forward, again, I hope this alongside the video and the podcast and the piece from Nikki that you got will really sort of prompt your thinking and just get you reflecting on, this idea of talent and what in a coaching sense it means and it can bring in terms of issues, challenges and opportunities for you on an everyday basis. So for me, what this has done really is given me an opportunity, and I suppose maybe some of that is thanks to lockdown, having a little bit more time, but really to sit and reflect. And when the word came up, I kind of thought, well, actually, what does it mean for me? What do I understand talent to be? And what I've done, and I suppose what I've been on really, is a little bit of a journey and exploration into revisiting a few things and just trying to make sense of it a little bit. Because I think one of the things I realised was almost this word, this really small word, this 6-letter word talent, almost has a huge range of meaning. And, it's sort of this umbrella term almost, particularly within sport for, programs. So we hear the talent pathway, the talent environment, talent recruitment, talent days, talent spotting, talent identification, talent development. So it's a really small word, yet it has a massively huge reach. And I wanted to go back and just say, okay, right, what really does it mean? And I think I came to this conclusion in my own mind that I didn't really understand or know what the actual definition of talent was. So I went right back to the beginning and looked at various places in terms of definitions. So I'm just going to start by sharing with you some of those things that came up for me. And, to start with, there's a standard English dictionary definition, which defines talent in two ways. Firstly, really simply, it defines it as a natural aptitude or skill. Interestingly, the second definition was a former weight and unit of currency used especially by the ancient Romans and Greeks, which really threw me because I had no idea that talent meant anything other than the first definition. So then I thought, well, I'll keep searching, and looked at another dictionary definition and came up to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which I believe is a US online word website. And they came up with a much more broad definition, really, of talent, and in 5 different ways. And the first one defined it either as a special, often athletic, creative, or artistic aptitude. And the second part of that was general intelligence or mental power, and in brackets, ability. Secondly, it talked about the natural endowments of a person. And again, that word natural came up. Thirdly, it said a person of talent or a group of persons of talent in a field or activity. So it could be, thinking about the talent pathway. That came to life, I think, in terms of that definition. Interestingly, again, 4th definition talked about any of several ancient units of weight, which really confused me. And then, interestingly, broke that down a little bit further, a unit of value equal to the value of a talent of gold or silver. I was like, oh, okay. Started to make connections in my own mind that there was something of value. So it was something that was perceived to be very valuable. Not really sure that means anything, but it was just interesting in my mind. And lastly, and I don't know why it said this was archaic, but it said it's a characteristic, feature, aptitude, or disposition of a person or animal. So again, just referring to the way of being for an individual. I suppose finally, for a dictionary definition, I went to the Collins Dictionary, and it talks about talent being the natural ability to do something well. And then it broke it down into, again, 5 different things. And it said, firstly, it's an innate ability, aptitude, or faculty, especially when unspecified, or it's above average ability. Secondly, it talked about a person or persons possessing such ability, so the talented or a talented individual. Thirdly, again, it brings back to that any of various ancient units of weight or money, which is surprising. I quite like this one, which made me laugh, made me smile. Informally, it's used to define sexually attractive people collectively, especially those living in a particular place, i.e. the local talent. So yeah, that made me smile and laugh, but very much defining a group. And lastly, an obsolete word for inclination, which kind of threw me a little bit. But some really interesting definitions there, and words that sprung out to me when I was looking at definitions kept coming back to this natural aptitude or natural ability. So talent being something that's natural, and I don't know how I don't know if it's got anything to do with how we're defining talent at this point in time, but that idea of it being a weight or a currency. So I think I'm going to park that for the time being and just let that sit. But also the Collins definition talking about innate ability. So what I took from that overall is that it's about something that's natural, something that's innate, and something that's there, and a person either has it or they don't. That's the sort of thing that I took, and that really got me thinking, because I suppose maybe an assumption when I'm looking at talent development, talent pathways, and maybe it's the way I'm looking at it, but it almost, the way we talk about talent infers that it's something that can be developed. So we can nurture the talent, we can develop talent, we can create talent development pathways. So I found that to be quite jarring, almost, in a sense that the definitions are really almost clear about it being talent is something that's innate and it's there or it isn't. Whereas when I'm looking from a sporting context and that sort of, developing talent, it's almost inferred that we are, talent is something that can be grown and nurtured. So I sort of took a little step back a little, and then started kind of thinking, well, let's look at other words. So in some of those dictionary definitions, there's a group of synonyms, which I just thought, well, let's have a look at what some things that are similar. And this really, to me, then started opening a broad doorway, almost, in which the more I pushed it, the more it started to help me think and reflect. So I'm just going to share with you a few things, and I've made a few notes. So I'm going to read them as opposed to just making them up. But in terms of talent, again, this is reinforcing my reflection that there was that natural ability. So talent implies an apparently native ability for a specific pursuit, and identifies either that it is or can be cultivated by the one possessing it. So talent is something that somebody has or they don't. And it's native ability, natural innate, that was in there. interestingly, other words, and we often talked about gifted and talented in sport and in schools. The gifted and talented program. And one of the synonyms talked about a gift, suggesting that a special ability is bestowed upon one, as by nature, or perhaps and it's not acquired through effort. So a gift is something that we just end up possessing. Now, maybe that is through birth, through our genes, through our natural heritage. But interestingly, maybe it's people believe, we hear people talk about God-given gifts and God-given talent. Maybe there is something, there is a strand of thought that believes that talent and ability is just gifted to you, so it just arrives. Then other words that really stuck out to me, and I'm just selecting a few, these aren't all the words that were in there. Talked about aptitude, and I quite like this idea of aptitude that implies a natural inclination for a particular work. Specifically, as if pointing to, it talked about special fitness or probable success in it. So, we hear aptitude tests, and, do people have an aptitude for that? It's almost like a bit of a precursor that they've got this interest and an inclination to get involved and do something. And I like that idea at the end that it talked about probable success in it. So maybe there's something about aptitude being an indicator that somebody could succeed, but again, that's not enough on its own. Another word which I'd not really come across before in this environment was faculty. And when I think of faculty, I either think of an academic university faculty, or we talk about, has somebody got all their faculties there? So I kind of found this a bit confusing to start with. But in this context, it talks about implying a special ability that is either inherent or acquired, as well as a ready ease in its exercise. So suddenly I started thinking, okay, well, faculty talks about either the people have it, but actually you can also gain something. So it's not necessarily something that you're born with, it can be developed over time. Other words that came up, which I found quite interesting, a knack. We hear people say, oh, they've got the knack. My grandma always used to say, oh, they've got the knack. And that talks about an acquired faculty for doing something cleverly or skillfully. So suddenly started to piece these together that, faculty isn't something that happens on its own, but actually if you combine it with a knack for something, then actually, and you're prepared to work, then maybe you start developing. And the last word that came across in this was genius. And it's quite interesting, I think, thinking about genius, and this said it implies an inborn mental endowment, especially within creative or inventive. So we kind of think about science and art and those sorts of things, that it's exceptional or phenomenal. So genius is something that's bestowed on people, and you are a genius or you're not, but it doesn't happen very often. And I just wanted to share those because I think those words really started to help my thinking, and start to try and break down almost when we talk about talent, or when I talk about talent, what does it actually mean? Because it's this small word, like I said at the start, that is almost this umbrella and uses this umbrella for a whole heap of things, right from, as I said, talent identification. So do we know what talent looks like? Right through to nurturing that talent and talent performing on a worldwide stage. And I'm just going to throw in a quote because I can't do a session without a quote. It's a Maya Angelou quote again, which is I love some of her stuff. But she talked, talent is like electricity. We don't understand electricity, but we use it. And I was like, oh, do you know what? That actually really reflects maybe where I am at the moment in terms of it being, talent is just, it's this magic that happens. So electricity, you switch the light on, or you switch your plug on, and electricity just appears and then you use it. But you don't understand, or I certainly don't understand how it actually gets there. And it did just make me prompt to think, actually, yeah, maybe I just take the word talent for granted, and I don't really understand where it comes from and what it actually means. So it really, again, just prompted questions in my head. So at this point, I have taken the word, looked at definitions, and probably ended up now with more questions than I had to start with. So what it did make me realise, perhaps, was that I don't really understand, and I've almost taken for granted and assumed from the culture in which I have worked for goodness knows how many years, more years than I care to remember, that talent is just something that is in sport. Talent is there, and every sport will have in some shape or form their talent pathway, talent development, all of those words that I've talked about before. And I suppose, in the past I've had discussions around, is talent, it's the nature-nurture debate. Is it about whether somebody has got it or not? Can you develop it? All of those questions. And I suppose my simplistic view before I started looking into these was that talent alone is not enough. It's talent plus hard work, and actually it's the effort and all of those things that make the difference. And yet we still call that talent, and say talented people can move up there. And I started looking at some of the environments and the sessions that we might be doing, and kind of thinking, actually, okay, well, let's take a group of riders in this case, or athletes or golfers or swimmers or whatever it might be, that are in some sort of squad system. So perhaps it's their very first squad that they've been in. Maybe they've gone through, it could be club level, it could be the competitive structure, shows or whatever it might be, but they've got to a point where they've made themselves visible and they've been selected into a squad. So they're coming to a central camp or central session, and there's a group of riders or athletes or whatever it might be who have been invited because of perhaps their talent or their results or something. And they've been identified as people with potential that with some support can develop and maybe perform. And I reflected on those words that come up with and almost was thinking, well, all of them could be exhibiting very similar behaviour. So they could be performing at a very similar level, but actually their journey to that point may be very different. So for some, perhaps they're there because they are talented. So they have that innate, natural ability that they just happen to have picked this up and been good at it. So actually they've never had to work at it. It's just something they do. There's something natural in there. Equally, there could be somebody who's gifted in there. So perhaps there's a belief, and they've been told since a young age, oh, you're so gifted for this. You've got a gift. And they're there believing that this is a gift. This is why they're there. Equally, perhaps there's somebody or a few people in that squad who are there because of their aptitude. So there was a natural inclination for them to be good at that particular sport. But actually, they've kind of then gone into it and developed that themselves. So maybe there's a bit of effort that's gone in, but it's not talent, it's not gift. They're there because of their aptitude and their propensity for training, for listening, for learning, all of those sorts of things. Faculty, using that word. Perhaps there's some people there who, okay, maybe it was inherent, but maybe they acquired that ability and ease in that exercise. So maybe they grew up in an environment where family members or friends rode or swam or ran or played football or rugby, whatever it might be, and they started to develop that faculty for it because there was something in their genetic makeup, maybe, but because of the environment, they had a desire to pursue it. Maybe there's people in that group that had a knack, so they'd acquired something. And just found that they'd got a knack for it and it was something that they loved. So they were motivated to learn and work, etc. And maybe you've got a couple of geniuses, or maybe one, because it says that they are exceptional and phenomenal. So maybe there's a genius in there who, for them, this is just what they do and they're just brilliant. And it did just make me think, we have potentially a whole group of people in a squad, right from first selection, potentially through to representing countries or whatever it might be, competing at Olympics, who all of whom have come through a very different pathway. And it could be for some of those reasons and some of those words, but almost we're umbrellaing and putting this word around them of talent. So perhaps it is about definition and how we nurture that and identify it and what we call it almost and what we name it. And so again, that was a bit of another recognition for me, saying, okay, we already know as coaches that all of our players, all of our athletes, all of our riders, all of our horses potentially have very different motivations and personal drivers, and everybody is unique. So we know as a coach that we're all constantly adapting to meet the needs of our riders in this case. But actually, let's add another facet in there in terms of their natural makeup. So perhaps the talented individual may never have had to work at something really hard in the past because it's just easy, it just happens. Whereas somebody with maybe more aptitude or knack actually didn't come naturally, but it was their work ethic that enabled them to develop that same ability in terms of performance. So immediately you've got those two things. And if you look at, this is where my mind sparked into different areas and thinking about growth mindset and saying, well, and maybe if we looked at that, we'd say that, the talented individual has a fixed mindset because it's just, I don't have to work at it. It just happens. And actually, when you put them in a pressure situation, what happens? We're maybe making assumptions that they're fixed mindsets, so they're not going to grow because they believe it's just talented. But actually, if they've never been given the environment and the opportunity to understand that, perhaps they don't have a fixed mindset. And if they were given the right environment and opportunity, it might open up opportunities for them to learn and grow. Equally, that individual who is in that position because of their aptitude and their hard work and their application, maybe they are, naturally they're willing to learn, and work ethic and all those sorts of things might imply that they have more of a growth mindset. But unless we have those conversations, unless we delve deeper and work out, well, why is it that they're there? We're not really sure, and we maybe make those wrong assumptions, or assumptions that don't necessarily match the motivation. So again, maybe more questions than answers, but the whole purpose of this really is to share some of my thinking and where I've got to, and hopefully that, as you listen, it will just prompt you to think about what you believe and how you perceive talent and those sorts of things, and just reinforce that this isn't about a right or wrong and what I'm presenting is the only way. This is presenting me saying, okay, this is my reflection, my process of exploring this subject in order for me to gain a bit more understanding and feel like I've got more of a balanced view, and how then I can, how will that impact upon what I do in different situations? I suppose that's my next lot of thinking. So then I decided to switch tacks a little bit, to switch focus a little bit, and through some of my work, I've realised that talent and talent development isn't only exclusive within sport. So more and more corporate organisations and businesses and companies are starting to use such words as talent acquisition, talent management, talent pool, talent development in terms of personnel who work in their organisations. So I thought, well, let's have a look at some of those sorts of things, and let's see if I can learn anything, and see if it throws any light on some of these things in a different way. And interestingly, came up, and again, some of the things around HR websites that I looked at, and there was this very sort of general sense again that some people will argue that talent is all genetics, and others will say it's learned in its nature. Interestingly, there was a general consensus that most people perhaps believe it's a bit of both, and that there was a definition there about talent being a special ability that potentially leads an individual to success. And I'm just going to leave that there. Let's repeat that. Potentially, talent can be defined as a special ability that potentially leads an individual to success. So almost it's a predisposition to success. Just in contrast to that, when looking at some of the definitions around, or workplace definitions of talent, again, what came up is this talent being defined by a natural aptitude, an inner quality that emerges I can't even say the word, effortlessly. So interestingly, again, that word natural there, natural ability, it's just something that happens. What also interested me then is on the same page that I found, it talks about skill, and let's define what skill is. And this defines skill as an acquired ability learned with effort. So this was the first time almost I positioned these two things side by side. So talent in this is natural, and it doesn't require effort. It just happens. Whereas skill is something that's learned, and you have to put some effort in to acquire that skill, which I found quite interesting. And then going back to that initial quote around talent being a special ability that potentially leads to individual success, I started thinking, well, actually the key word there is potentially, because if talent is natural, if you don't do anything with it, then it won't ever grow or develop, because it's just there, it's just a thing. And I started looking and thinking, well, maybe that means that talent is actually quite a static concept. On its own, talent is something that people possess or don't. And it means that they're able to perform and learn and grow or develop up to a certain level, because that's almost the limit of their talent. Beyond that, if there's nothing else, just talent, it becomes static and it just stays there. So that interested me. What I then started looking at is, okay, well, how do people define talent, and what are the sort of angles that they use, and is there anything we can transfer over to sport and learn, and vice versa? And there's words that are commonplace in the workplace now, such as talent acquisition. So you quite often see that within recruitment adverts and things. And that's talked about attracting and recruiting skilled employees. So that struck a chord, because it's almost talent acquisition is then it's recruiting skilled employees. So I started then weighing that up, saying, well, on one hand, talent is here, and they're talking about talent being something that's natural. But actually, what they're looking for is skilled people. And skill requires effort through that definition we go back to. So didn't quite match up for me. Then we hear about talent management, and that's the process of developing and retaining employees with skill and training them and succession planning. So I'll read that again, because I think I maybe stumbled across those words. So talent management is the process of developing and retaining employees, and they do that through skill training and succession planning. So again, I started thinking, well, this doesn't quite sit right, because we're saying we're managing talent, but actually what we're looking for is the skill. And by default, skill requires effort, whereas talent doesn't. Talent pool, again, is another phrase that we hear sometimes, and it talks about that being a group of candidates who are potentially a good fit for that company's current or future needs. And alongside that, talent hunting, which feels quite Goodwill Hunting-esque. But it's about aiming to identify and recruit high potential candidates who'll help the business achieve their goals. And if I take those words and then think about the language we use in sport, arguably talent hunting. Well, talent, we do that in sport. That's our talent identification days. Who's got talent? Britain's got talent, whatever it might be. But that's, can we identify people, athletes, riders, swimmers, netballers, whatever it might be? Can we identify those people who have the right aptitude and skills to potentially deliver medals, ultimately, is what we're looking at. Talent pool. It's a group of people. Well, actually, arguably, that's our talent pathways in sports, because it's a group of people who potentially possess those abilities to go forth and win medals and create success for that organisation, in this case, for that sport. And then those couple of other ones, talent acquisition, attracting and recruiting employees. Again, that's our talent recruitment days. We use that language in sport. And talent management, developing and retaining with skill training and succession planning. That is all wrapped up in the language of what we put in place in sport. But the real thing that sticks for me in all of that is this idea that in my head I started to see talent, or I have started now to see talent as this static thing. You either have it or you don't. If we go back to all of these definitions, the Collins definition talks about talent as the innate ability, aptitude, or faculty. So it's innate being the key word. The Merriam-Webster dictionary talks about the natural endowments of a person. The Oxford English Dictionary talks about natural aptitude or skill. And in workplace definitions, talent development or talent definition is a natural aptitude, inner quality that requires that emerges effortlessly. So it's this thing that's just there. And I started to think, well, if talent's the sort of thing that is almost the baseline, actually, when we talk about talent development, talent recruitment, talent identification, what we're actually looking to recruit or identify is the skills that people have developed. Now, for some people, those skills could have been developed or could have grown out of the fact that they have talent. Whereas for others, going back to our group of people in a squad for the first time potentially, others are there because they have acquired that ability over time and they've learned it with effort, which suggests that that's a skill, but perhaps maybe they didn't have talent, but they had aptitude, faculty and a knack, or maybe they were a bit of a genius, one of those sorts of things. So it really did start to make me think about how we identify and how we look and define talent. And perhaps for me, I have started to conclude that actually it's skills and behaviours that we see in people indicate where they're at. And actually, as we grow and go up the talent pathway, arguably somebody who has perhaps more aptitude or faculty or more of a knack for learning and developing skills, perhaps that's when we'll see the difference between people who are just, in inverted commas, talented and actually people who have the right aptitude. Now, I wonder if you have talent and aptitude and faculty and all of those other things, perhaps that accelerates accelerates progress and learning? I don't know. It's just a question in my head. And the last thing really just to, I suppose, reflect on before trying to pull some of this together a little bit was thinking particularly around workplace talent and workplace management, a definition. There was this couple of articles I found that, again, I've made some notes just to make sure I get this straight in my head. But there was this idea that after you hire these brilliant people, you have to make sure you nurture and grow their talent and skill, because you can't just hire them and expect that they're going to be geniuses and solve the world, unless they are geniuses. And the general consensus across a lot of the workplace literature and work that I looked at was that it's actually about creating a working environment which enables employees to develop over time and accomplish their endeavours. And this argument that actually what we need to do is equip them with learning, training, whatever it might be, coaching opportunities, in order for them to be able to develop and succeed and bring positive results. And that really then aligned me and brought me right back to what is great coaching. And if we go back to really simplistic terms, and we've talked, I know, on the Pathways program, and you all have, some of you have done level 4 or level 3 or other development opportunities. There'll be this discussion around, well, what do we really mean around rider-centered coaching or participant-centered coaching or person-centered coaching? And how is it that we're creating environments where individuals can thrive and flourish and grow? And I started thinking, well, actually, as a coach, fundamentally, that is our role, regardless of whether it is a beginner who is undertaking their very first coaching session, or the 3-time Olympian who is coming back to you for some more coaching and wanting to continue strive and get better. Actually, our intention is about creating an environment, creating a relationship, and enabling them to understand what their potential might be and achieve that potential through the interventions we make and through them taking on that responsibility and wanting to learn and grow. And it really did sort of make me think around the use of the word talent, because almost, go back to what I said to start with, it's this very small word that actually, if we take its true definition, and again, this is just my reflection, my interpretation, but its true definition seems to be around natural aptitude or skill. So it's something that is natural. You don't have to work at it. Coming to that talent definition, and natural aptitude and inner quality that emerges effortlessly. You don't have to work at it. So if you've got a whole heap of talent, maybe you will get to the top without trying. If you've got a tiny bit of talent, actually, what's the thing that's going to really help you and accelerate your development? And if you've got no talent at all, actually, how are you going to get there? Because arguably, you might maybe have an aptitude for something, and it's the environment in which you grow and happen to be that enables you to really flourish and develop that skill and capability and ability to do things. So I think my conclusions around talent are that maybe in sport, and perhaps this is being really radical, I'm not sure, but perhaps talent is the wrong word, because almost I'm looking at it thinking it narrows that definition so much. And what we're talking about is skill, aptitude, effort, ability, coaching environment. So almost by using that one word that says this is the talent pathway, and this is a question that I'm still debating, are we, by doing that, almost disregarding a whole heap of the population who potentially could have aptitude and potential? It just has never been badged as skill because they've had to try and work at it. And I don't know the answer to that, because probably we have a whole heap of culture and history within sports that has used that word talent, and there's a sort of assumed meaning about what it is. But equally, it's that assumed meaning that I think led me until sitting down and reflecting on this properly, as I think I have done over the last couple of weeks, is, okay, I'm not really sure I actually really honestly knew what talent meant, and digging into it, what it implied. Maybe I just got caught up in the whole sporting use of the word and saw talent as something that it perhaps wasn't. And just to close, I'll maybe offer a final personal reflection, and that is I hate being called talented. So I play guitar, I sing, I do lots of other things. And if somebody says to me, "Oh, you're so talented," I almost want to throw that back and because for me that implies that it's just effortless. So I come back to maybe I did realise that. And what I want to say to people if they say, "Oh, you're so talented," is, no, I'm not. What I do is work really hard. I want to do something and I learn, and I spend hours going over songs and learning them and repeating them and interpreting them because I want to, and I want to do that, and I want to put the time and effort in. Maybe I have a little bit of talent in there, but actually what I have is aptitude and a passion and a desire to learn and explore and try new things. So almost for me, if somebody uses the word talent and says to me, "Oh, you're so talented," I kind of take it as not as a compliment. I take it as a bit of a negative, because I almost feel that they're disregarding the huge amount of work that maybe I've put into place to get myself in that position. And I suppose that on that reflection, that just led me down this path of wondering, well, okay, what does it mean? What does talent mean? And actually, if we were to frame it in a different way, if we were just at least to acknowledge that talent might be a tiny part of people's success, but actually there's a whole heap of other things that determine whether people make it or whether they grow and learn and develop. But fundamentally, from a coaching perspective, we have a huge ability, a huge opportunity to impact and create an environment around these people, regardless of whether we use the word talented or not. But actually, it's more to do with the environment that we create and the opportunities we provide and how we do that determines whether somebody will engage and learn and grow and develop and go on to achieve incredible successes, or whether they will drop out of the sport. So I think that is where I'll leave my ramblings and reflections, and let you now go and reflect further on the notes you've made. And I look forward to catching up with you on a one-to-one basis to reflect further. And would also urge you and encourage you to talk with each other, or find somebody else that's on the programme where you can have a conversation about talent, or look wider. Who else in your network would be willing to have a conversation over talent? And it doesn't have to be in sport. Maybe there's people who work in business, or who work in schools, because often there's talented and gifted programs within schools. So find somebody that you can have this type of discussion with, and just keep checking your own thinking, because certainly this process for me has really enabled me and encouraged me to reflect back on what do I actually think talent means, and perhaps what I realised is that I didn't really know, and there was a lot of assumptions that had been built in, and this has been an opportunity just to check my assumptions and maybe clarify some of my thoughts, and give me some good questions which I want to keep exploring going forward. So thanks for listening. Keep in touch and enjoy exploring this fascinating subject. So bye from me for now.